So the fourth concept here is that of surrender. So men have, of course, been to a great extent in control of things on Earth for thousands of years. And women have been forced to some extent to go along with the visions and the plans and the ideas of men. Not exclusively. These generalizations are, of course, insufficient, but obviously our cultures have been very much created by men. The U.S. Constitution, not a woman was in the room. Our religious texts. I was looking up the top 10 religious texts of history. I was looking them up online, and of the top 10 religious texts of human history, then as best as I could figure out, then there is not a word from a woman in any of those. Could be wrong about like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I couldn't figure out who it was written by. There could possibly be some input from women in maybe some of those books, but by and large, 90-something%, maybe 100%, you're talking about all men's perspective. The masculine energy is one of more often taking action, and the feminine energy is one of greater beingness. And so the feminine element has been to a greater extent one of surrender to the masculine. So this is getting into some pretty juicy stuff here, but I don't necessarily believe that this is completely wrong, this concept of the feminine surrendering to the masculine. And ultimately then there must be a surrender of masculine and feminine to each other in their merging, in finding true unity. But there is a difference in the feminine in terms of that receptivity and that opening to the masculine active force. And yet there needs to be a very important distinction made between surrender versus submission. To a great extent, not exclusively, but to a great extent, it, depending on the culture, depending on the time of history, etc., then the feminine has been one of a state of submission to the masculine versus one of surrender. And the difference is in individual will. Submission is a state of repression of will. Submission is that you must do what somebody says they want you to do. That you have no will or desire or perspective of your own. You are completely at their mercy. Surrender, on the other hand, is quite different, even though it may look similar. So I think that a good little example for what surrender is that classic couples exercise of one person falling into the arms of the other, falling backwards into the arms of the other. So one person stands facing the other person is facing away from them, and they fall into their arms, trusting that person is going to catch them. And so that is a state of surrender based on trust. And the person in the state of catching that other person, they are in a state of greater power over that other person's experience, in a way, obviously, whether they're going to catch them or not. But this is not something to be prideful of or arrogant about. You are, in a state of trust from that person that you're going to do the right thing. And so this is the state of surrender versus one of submission. And ultimately, the experience of merging back into God is one of surrender, of being willing to give up being in control and merging into something else. And so this is something that women are much more accustomed to and much more prepared for than are men. Men are much more expecting and used to being in a state of control, of being in charge, and not of being able to surrender and let go and give themselves to something else in a way that women are. And so the feminine is closer to God, getting back to this, the title of this video, in that regard of being more prepared, more able to surrender as a necessary component of merging with someone or something else for the sake of unity. And so this is a lesson that men need to be looking to women to learn something from. So the last thing here is the concept of contraction. And somebody was commented on a Facebook post of mine recently, saying that the ultimate impulse of the masculine is one of expansion, of expanding energy, expansion of being, moving outwards. And the ultimate impulse of the feminine is one of contraction, of drawing inwards. And as I understand it, then the expansion of the universe is the masculine propulsion of the universe moving away in separation. That ultimately this whole experience of separation of being, of this being that is God, which was at one time unified as one, but then chose to have an experience of separation for the learning of that experience. This was a masculine act of the Big Bang, basically, an explosion. And thus the universe started flying outwards. And the feminine impulse is to draw back inwards in order to bring things back into oneness. And ultimately, this is the direction that we need to go in, if and when we are actually interested and ready for that state of oneness of being. Because the state of expansion, of moving outwards, is a temporary state. Our ultimate state of being is one of unity, of oneness, of merging back into that unified being that God once was. And so the feminine impulse here is the right impulse. Not that the masculine was wrong in terms of, that was the plan, that was the idea, was to have an experience of separation, of moving outwards, of division. But ultimately that is a temporary experience of separation within the larger context of a unified being, which ultimately will come back into unity. And so the masculine impulse in this direction has been absolutely an essential element of the experience. That was the way that it was meant to be. But that is not a sustainable state of being ultimately, one of separation. That this is a outward movement of consciousness of the universe into fragmented different beings, which will ultimately, eventually, inevitably come back together. And the feminine impulse of seeking to draw back within is the direction that we will eventually head in when we're ready for it, when it's the right time, and depending on the individual, when they seek, desire, choose to head back in the direction of God rather than flying outwards. And so the feminine desire, impulse, direction, input here is the ultimate truth versus the masculine outwards projection of being. And so in saying all of this, then hopefully this has not come across as some sort of a judgment against the masculine whatsoever. That is not the point. But it is that the masculine and feminine have played different roles here. The masculine has had its say on Earth, and as best as I understand, in the cosmos, in the even bigger picture. But the masculine way of being has pervaded and been dominant as part of the experience, but it has resulted in a very imbalanced and very challenging, difficult, painful experience for many. And now is the time of a great transition, as we have seen in the past 50 years or so, with the greater balance between masculine and feminine in societies around the world, of coming into greater equality and freedom to work as they choose, explore different careers and whatnot, and be participating in every element of society, including the government and the potential for a woman president in the U.S. sometime in the near future. It could certainly happen, but still, despite this is heading in the right direction. But still, we are still in the trajectory of that masculine direction of a masculine dominant paradigm, which is now being supported in more equal numbers of men and women in that same direction. So we're still on the masculine train of imbalance. Human society ultimately has not changed in the most fundamental of ways in the past 50 years with the various changes that have occurred. We're still on this, petroleum-based system of utilizing limited resources, which are polluting the planet and creating plastics, which are then ending up in the ocean and killing sea life. And we're still on a path of extreme imbalance with the planet, with the environment, with nature. We are still on a path that is not truly honoring the feminine energy, but we have sort of rounded the bend, as it were, in terms of coming back into greater balance, and so that is a huge development. But there is still a long ways to go. Hopefully, the point in this video is for there to be greater recognition and understanding of that which the feminine offers to the mix, to reality, to how we approach life and the societies that we are creating, and how much of that has been buried and is still buried to a great extent but is beginning to surface and is sort of trickling into and percolating through society in many different ways. So the point is not that men are not godly whatsoever, but that in my view, then the feminine and women have essential information and input that is absolutely necessary for the survival of humanity and for coming into a greater balance with the planet and to creating societies that are in a much saner, kinder, gentler, more loving paradigm of being versus what we have at this time. So thanks for watching. Take care. Namaste.